Welcome Life Science learners to another installment of Life Sciences for You. Trust that you guys are well and excited about our lesson today. In our lesson today, we're going to focus on a revision lesson on environmental studies. We've looked at several concepts over the last couple lessons on environmental studies. It's important that we review and summarize those concepts and then get into some revision-based questions. In our segment today, we will try and apply what we've understood and applied in the previous lessons to the context of understanding questions. That's a key component to being able to revise, is to take some questions from your textbooks, from some assignments, and try and apply your understanding to that. And that's the best and most effective way to really test if you understand how the content is tested. So that's essentially what we're going to do today. Get through some of the main concepts, overview them, and then we're going to take some questions at different levels and try and apply our understanding to that. So I hope you guys are excited and keen to join me on this. So let's get straight into an overview of the concepts and a summary of these. Well, as I mentioned, let's review the main concepts. Let's look at what ecosystems consist of. We've discussed the concept of what biomes are and the concept of ecology, where we've studied different factors and how they influence living organisms. We've spent some time looking at biomes, and we paid special focus on the terrestrial biomes in South Africa. We also recognize that there are aquatic biomes, and these are important in understanding the context of a South African environment. We went on to looking at biotic and abiotic factors and how these influence ecosystems. It's important to recognize that we have to spend some time looking at energy flow through different ecological pyramids, as well as the concept of what trophic levels are. We also need to discuss and have discussed the different nutrient cycles with a special emphasis on the water, oxygen, carbon, and the nitrogen cycles. And in all of these, we've always mentioned the impact that humans have had on the ecosystems and our role that we play in maintaining this. So as we get into this lesson, as we revise this topic, it's important that we have a summary of these things. So the main concept that we spent some time ago looking at was the concept of biosphere. And if we were to unpack the biosphere, it was that part of the earth where organisms exist. And we said that can be broken up into the lithosphere, which is the soil and all the parts in there, the hydrosphere, which would be the aquatic water systems, so the rivers, lakes, ponds, streams, dams, as well as the atmosphere and the air that supports life. So those three components make up the biosphere. We also mentioned that biomes are an important part within biospheres, and we recognize that biomes were areas that are characterized by its unique climate, the type of plants and animals that are found in that area. So biomes are little areas that are characterized by its unique climate and fauna and flora, which is plant and animals that live in those areas. We also had an overview of the South African biomes, and we looked at these 7 different biomes. And it's important that when we look at biomes, we recognize where these areas are, the type of climate that is experienced. We've looked at the typical or unique animals that are found in these areas, as well as the plants. And we've also discussed in the context of the South African terrestrial biomes, which of these are significant and important for us as one, a mechanism of ecotourism, another in terms of conservation hotspots. So that's important for us to recognize. So we also went on to looking at the concept of ecosystems, and we mentioned that these again refer to the interaction of the living and the non-living components with each other and their environment. We recognize that abiotic factors play a significant role in the environment, and when we talk of abiotic factors, we broke that up into the layout of the land, which we refer to as physiographic factors. We spoke about the soil. We also spoke about factors such as light, pH of the soil. We've looked at the factors that affect the climate. We've looked at, again, I mentioned the word edaphic, and that included soil and its various components. We also need to recognize that we talk about energy moving from one organism to the next, and we discussed that through energy flow in an ecosystem. And we studied that by looking at food chains, and we said food chains illustrate how energy flowed from one organism, producers, to consumers, and to secondary and tertiary consumers. We then coined the term trophic levels, which again refers to the position of organisms in relation to producers in the food chain. We also spent some time looking at food pyramids. Again, the organization of either energy or biomass or numbers into these ecological pyramids. Again, a representation of the different organisms at different trophic levels. It's important that we recognize that nutrients are cycled in the environment, and in that we refer to the carbon cycle, we refer to the oxygen cycle, we referred also to the water and the nitrogen cycle. And we see these 4 cycles as important because they are able to sustain the basic elements or nutrients that are required for living organisms. And by nutrients, we mentioned that these are the essential building blocks that organisms require in terms of their existence and survival. It's also important that at the end of this section, we recognize that the context of our environment is very important. One in terms of ecotourism in South Africa. What is ecotourism and its importance to sustaining our environment, as well as being able to produce jobs for indigenous and local inhabitants of an area. So that's an important part of understanding the context of environmental studies. We also included in that the human impact that we have. So in terms of the effects of human activities such as pollution, on the carbon cycle, on the nitrogen cycle, and how that affects the quality of the environment and the future of human existence on Earth. So guys, as we get into the rest of this, let's start by trying to apply our understanding. And I often do this by putting in some what we call, these are our feelers into the topic, and I use a list of terminology. And so often I advise my learners to be able to create a list of terms. And that is important when you study, because that allows you to be able to have context of all the important concepts in a specific topic. So let's try and use our list of terms that you have created to help you answer these questions. So I'm going to go through these, and I hope that as we do this, that you are able to jot down some of your answers and then check that with me as I get into the session. So the first term we're going to look at is a set of interconnected food chains. So guys, remember that when we talk of food chains, again, a food chain shows the flow of energy from the producers all the way up to the different trophic levels. However, when we go into an ecosystem, we see that food chains are interconnected, meaning we've got food chains where at different levels interconnected. And that term that shows the interconnected food chains are called food webs. An organism that lives only in water. It's important that we recognize that we've got organisms that live on land and those that live in water. So the ones that live on land, we refer to those as the terrestrial organisms. However, the ones that live in water, we refer to those as your aquatic organisms. So it's important that we recognize that life forms exist on land, which are terrestrial, as well as in water, which are aquatic. The next term would be all living organisms in an ecosystem. Again, the concept of living refers to biology, so it's the biotic components that we refer to in an environment are the living components. The next term, a biome that is characterized by having large trees that are shade-loving shrubs in the undergrowth. So as you prepare on this section, it's important that you recognize the characteristics of each biome. And so some of these biomes have a distinct type of plant or climate. Here we're looking at shade-loving large trees which support undergrowth of plants that enjoy the cool. And this is, we often see this in your forest biomes where the shaded plants are covered below by the tall trees that are up. So this would be a forest biome where we see the plants that enjoy the shade right at the base of that forest. The next term, an organism that is not indigenous to an area but has become a problem. So this is referring to species that are naturally not found in an area. And so we know that we have plants and organisms that are naturally found in an area. We refer to them as your indigenous species. However, we do have species of plants and animals that have been brought in or accidentally or intentionally from other areas that are not naturally found in that area. And these organisms often affect the indigenous species, and we refer to these as your alien species. And these are plants or animals that affect the natural growth of indigenous species in an area. And finally, we're looking at abiotic factors that includes the height above sea level. So when we talk of abiotic factors, we refer to the factors that influence the living organisms. When we spoke about your physiographic factors, we recognized that there were three types of factors. So it was aspect, slope, and altitude. And so if we look at altitude, again, altitude refers to the level of the area in relation to the sea. So height above sea level will be altitude. So guys, we've gone through the segment looking at the application of some of our terms. We also looked at an overview of all the main concepts in this section. Trust that you've been able to relate to some of these terms. Let's have a short break, and when we get back, we'll take a few more questions on this segment. See you in a little while.